A strange ringing filled my ears as my grandfather's words registered across the table. "Glad you're enjoying the college fund we set up for you," he said, raising his glass, chandeliers glinting off crystal and fine china. The Thanksgiving turkey before me suddenly turned to ash in my mouth. "What fund?" I managed, the words barely audible over the sudden thunder of my heartbeat. The entire table froze. Dad's wine sloshed over his wrist, staining his crisp white cuff crimson. Mom's complexion drained to ghostly white, her fingers suddenly trembling against her napkin. Even the glow from the cinnamon candles seemed to dim, as if the light itself was retreating from what was about to be exposed. "Wait, you didn't know?" whispered my 8-year-old cousin, his innocent voice slicing through the suffocating silence. "My name is Violet, I'm 22 and a college senior working 2 jobs. This is the story of how I reclaimed not just my stolen future, but my voice." The dining room at my grandfather's mansion had always felt like a museum where I didn't belong: crystal chandeliers, antique furniture worth more than my entire apartment, and family portraits that somehow never quite captured my face in the light. I'd arrived earlier that evening in my thrift dress, smoothing invisible wrinkles, while my family arrived in clothes that had never seen a discount rack. For years, I'd been drowning, working coffee shop shifts until 2 a.m., skipping meals to make rent, patching shoes with duct tape, and taking out crushing student loans, all while my parents assured everyone I was doing fine. The revelation of a college fund I'd never known about wasn't just about money. It was the moment I realized my entire struggle had been unnecessary, manufactured by the very people who were supposed to protect me. "The fund," my grandfather repeated slowly, confusion replacing the warmth in his eyes. "The one we started when you were born. We've been adding to it every year. Your parents have been managing it." I turned to my father, watching as defense replaced his initial shock. Mom's eyes remained fixed on her plate, her shoulders curving inward as if trying to disappear. Behind their silence lay years of decisions that had built their comfort while I worked myself to exhaustion. "You've been managing it," I said, each word heavier than the last, "while I've been living off minimum wage coffee shifts and microwave noodles, and somehow that fund never found its way to me." Mom's voice emerged thin and brittle. "Violet, please. We used it for emergencies, for the house, for Oliver's braces. You were doing fine." "Fine?" The laugh that escaped me sounded like breaking glass. "Do you even know what fine looked like for me? Working nights while studying, skipping meals to pay rent, watching my classmates focus on their education while I balanced 3 jobs just to survive. You called that fine?" Grandfather's posture stiffened, the pride in his bearing draining away as he turned to my parents. "That money wasn't yours to use," he said, voice sharp as a blade. "We made it clear it was for Violet, for her future." Dad's tone shifted instantly from guilt to defense. "Maybe if you hadn't insisted on putting it in our names." "Enough." Grandfather's voice cut through the room like glass shattering. "We trusted you." The silence that followed was unbearable. Grandmother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Aunt Jessica leaned forward, sensing gossip disguised as concern. My cousins stared at their plates, and my brother Oliver suddenly found his phone fascinating. I couldn't breathe. I sat there surrounded by gold silverware and fine china, realizing the family that preached loyalty had stolen my future, one emergency at a time. The betrayal burned in my chest, a physical pain that radiated outward until even my fingertips tingled with it. I pushed my chair back, the scrape echoing across the polished floor. "You let me drown," I said softly. "And you watched." Mom reached out, but I pulled my hand away. "Don't," I said, my voice low, steady. "You don't get to fix this with tears." I stood, the chandelier light splintering through sudden moisture in my eyes. Nobody followed as I walked out. In the hallway, my reflection flashed in a gold-framed mirror, small, furious, unrecognizable. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the shaking, a new thought formed: if they could lie that easily, they had no idea what truth could do. The night air bit at my skin as I stepped outside, each breath forming clouds that dissipated too quickly. The mansion behind me glowed warm and gold, but every window felt like an eye watching me leave. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I drove through the darkness, my mind replaying every word of the confrontation, until I finally reached my small apartment across town. By the time I reached my apartment, my dress still carried the scent of their flowers and false warmth. I tore it off, dropped it onto the floor, and sat on the edge of my bed, trembling not from cold but from a fury I'd never allowed myself to feel before. I kept hearing Grandfather's voice, clear as crystal, "The fund we set up for you," and Dad's defensive, "We meant to replace it." Every word replayed like a lie I'd been trained to accept. Around me, everything looked smaller than it had that morning: the peeling paint, the flickering light, the stack of bills on my desk, half paid, some unopened. The numbers blurred as I stared at them: rent, tuition, groceries, interest. Every sacrifice I'd made, every hour I'd spent believing struggle was noble, it had all been unnecessary. They'd let me live like this while building their comfort on money meant for me. I pulled out my laptop and searched for the bank Grandfather had mentioned. First National Bank had come up during dinner when he spoke about where they'd established the account. After an hour of dead ends and shaky phone calls, I finally reached someone who could help. "Do you have an account under my name, Violet Knight?" I asked, fingers pressed so hard against my phone that my knuckles went white. The hold music played for too long. Then a voice returned, careful and hesitant. "Yes, but the balance is zero." "Zero." The word felt almost gentle, like it was trying not to hurt me, but it did. The representative hesitated. "Withdrawals were made regularly, signed by Peter and Robin Knight." I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the dark. No music, no crying, just silence pressing against the walls while my mind catalogued every sacrifice, every moment of struggle, against the backdrop of this new knowledge. They hadn't just taken money, they'd stolen years of peace, of focus, of normal college experiences. The next morning, I walked across campus to the legal aid office, clutching a folder with every financial document I could find. The woman behind the desk listened quietly, flipping through the pages. When she finally looked up, her eyes were steady. "Violet, if that fund was set up for your education and they used it for themselves, that's misappropriation." The word hung heavy between us: ugly, legal, final. "Is that a crime?" I asked. "It can be," she said gently. "If you want to pursue it, start collecting proof." That evening, back in my apartment, I built a case. After speaking with the bank representative, I submitted a formal request for my account records as the named beneficiary. 3 days later, they sent me everything, every withdrawal, every signature, every transaction over the years. The campus legal aid office covered the initial filing fees, explaining that cases like mine qualified for their assistance program. Every bill, every record, every trace of the life I'd survived without their help. I laid them out across my floor, piece by piece, until the carpet disappeared under paper. Each document was a scar I could finally see. When I was done, I stood in the stillness, surrounded by the life they'd stolen, and realized I wasn't powerless anymore. They'd taught me silence was strength. But now I knew the truth: strength was speaking first and letting the consequences follow. The 4 weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas passed in a blur of paperwork and determination. I prepared my case carefully over those weeks, organizing the bank statements chronologically in a folder I kept with me everywhere. When Christmas dinner was announced, I knew exactly what I needed to bring. Christmas came quickly that year, wrapped in fake cheer and lights that didn't warm anything. The same house that had glittered at Thanksgiving now looked colder, as if even the gold in the chandeliers couldn't hide the cracks. I almost didn't go, but a week before Christmas, my phone rang unexpectedly. It was Grandfather, his voice gentler than I remembered. "You should be here, Violet," he'd said. "You deserve to be." When Christmas arrived a month later, I found myself once again standing at the entrance of my grandfather's mansion. I went not as the quiet daughter anymore, but as the woman who knew the truth. The front door opened to the same smell of cinnamon and money. My parents were already there, dressed to match the room, perfectly pressed, perfectly false. Mom's voice rose an octave when she saw me. "Violet, you came?" she said, like I'd done something generous. Dad gave a stiff nod, his jaw tight. He hadn't looked me in the eye since Thanksgiving. Oliver mumbled a half-hearted hey from the couch, his eyes barely lifting from his phone. I hung my coat and glanced toward the dining room. The table was set again, same china, same silverware, same seats. Only this time the warmth was gone. Grandmother stood by the kitchen doorway, hands fidgeting with her apron. Grandfather sat at the head of the table, expression unreadable. Dinner started the way all-night dinners did, small talk with edges. Weather, work, prices. Aunt Jessica dropped passive-aggressive comments like, "Still in that little apartment, dear." And Uncle James pretended not to hear. I let them talk. I waited. Halfway through the meal, Dad stood and tapped his glass with a spoon. I just want to say, he began, rehearsed smile on his face, that family means everything. We've been through a lot this year, but what matters is sticking together. I felt bitter laughter rise in my throat but didn't let it out. Instead, I reached down, lifted the folder from beside my chair, and placed it gently on the table. The sound of it hitting the wood cut through the chatter. Since Thanksgiving, I said, voice steady, I've been asking one question: what fund? The room froze. Grandfather looked up sharply. Mom's hand stopped halfway to her glass. I have the answer now, I continued, sliding the folder toward the center. Every withdrawal, every date, every signature. You didn't use the fund for me. You used it for yourselves, for the roof, the car, Oliver's braces, groceries, vacations. All of it. Mom's lips trembled. Violet, please, not tonight. I cut her off. Not tonight? I spent years patching my shoes with duct tape while you sat on money meant for me. I worked double shifts, starved through finals, while you told everyone I was doing fine. Dad's face darkened. We did what we had to do for the family. I met his eyes. No. You did what was easiest for you. I was family too. A long, brittle silence followed. The clock ticked once, twice. Grandmother whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath. Then grandfather reached for the folder. He opened it slowly, scanning the first few pages: bank records, payment slips, my tuition notices. His hands trembled slightly. When he looked up, his voice was quiet but razor-sharp. You stole from your own daughter, he said to my parents. From your own blood. Mom's tears came fast, messy. We didn't mean to hurt her. You drained her future, grandfather snapped. And lied to me about it for years. Dad tried to speak, but the anger in grandfather's eyes stopped him cold. I trusted you, Peter. I trusted you with her life. For a moment, no one breathed. Then I spoke, soft but clear. I've already filed a report. The bank's investigation is open. They'll be in touch about repayment and legal steps. The room exploded. Dad slammed his hand on the table, rattling the china. You're suing your own parents? No, I said. I'm holding thieves accountable. There's a difference. Mom sobbed harder. Violet, you can't do this to us. I looked at her and felt nothing but distance. You did this to yourselves. You just didn't expect me to notice. Aunt Jessica leaned forward, whispering, "Oh dear Lord," like she was watching a movie she couldn't turn off. Oliver sat frozen, guilt flickering across his face as he finally understood his braces had come at the cost of my education. Grandfather stood slowly, his chair scraping the floor. He walked around the table and stopped beside me. For a second, I thought he might be angry that I'd made a scene. Instead, he placed a hand on my shoulder. You don't have to face this alone, he said quietly. I nodded once, throat tight. I know. Dad's eyes darted between us, disbelief creeping in. You're taking her side? There's only one side here, grandfather said. The truth. No one spoke after that. The only sounds were the slow ticking of the grandfather clock and the faint hiss of the fireplace. I gathered the folder, slid it back into my bag and stood. My legs were steady this time. As I reached the doorway, Mom called out through her tears. Please, Violet, we can fix this. I turned back just once. You can't fix something you never intended to keep whole. Outside, snow was falling, thick, quiet, relentless. The air bit at my face, but I didn't mind. Each step away from that house felt lighter. In the driveway, my car was dusted with white. I brushed it off with my sleeve, opened the door, and looked back one last time. The mansion glowed behind me, beautiful and broken. Inside, they'd be sitting in that silence, facing what they'd done. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. As I drove away, the snow caught in the headlights, swirling like ash. The house disappeared in the rearview mirror, and I whispered to no one. Everything fell apart tonight. But this time it wasn't me who broke. The letter from the bank arrived a week later, thick envelope, official seal. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The investigation was underway. Every withdrawal, every forged signature, every transaction was under review. If fraud was proven, my parents would be held financially responsible. I didn't smile, didn't cheer. Justice rarely feels like joy. It feels like breathing again after years underwater. A few days after that Christmas confrontation, grandfather called me on my cell phone, his voice resolute. "There's something waiting for you at First National Bank downtown," he said, giving me the address and contact person. I drove to the bank the next morning. When I arrived, the teller handed me a cashier's check and a note in his handwriting, "For your start, not your survival, $20,000. Enough to lift the weight without erasing the memory of how it got there." I paid down my student loans that afternoon. Watching the number shrink on the screen didn't feel like victory. It felt like reclaiming time that had been stolen. I opened a new account under my name only. No shared signatures, no loopholes, just mine. My parents tried calling multiple times in the months that followed, but I maintained my distance. The legal proceedings continued, and our relationship remained severed, likely permanently. The final ruling required them to repay the full amount they had taken, nearly $87,000 with interest, through a court-monitored payment plan that would take years to fulfill. 6 months after that Christmas confrontation, I stood on the graduation stage. Spring came early that year. I graduated under a pale blue sky, wearing a borrowed cap and a smile that finally felt earned. In the crowd, I saw grandfather and grandmother clapping for me. My parents weren't there. I told myself I didn't care. And for once, it was true. Oliver texted me after graduation. "I'm sorry," he wrote. "I didn't know." I responded simply, "I believe you." It was a small step, but perhaps someday we could rebuild what our parents had broken. When I walked across that stage, I wasn't carrying their shame anymore. Only my own name and the quiet kind of peace that comes after the storm. They say family is forever, but forever doesn't mean blind loyalty. Sometimes it means knowing when to walk away. I used to think strength was staying silent, keeping the peace no matter the cost. But now I know silence only protects the ones who hurt you. Family isn't the people who share your blood. It's the ones who don't steal your future. If you've ever had to choose truth over family, tell me where you're listening from so I know I'm not alone. And hit subscribe because the next story might remind you just how strong you already are.